This is a follow-up meeting. Hold on. To the meeting we had last week, and I want to recognize that we're aware that the events of last week, the tragic shooting at King Soopers, is something we'll recognize formally at our meeting next Tuesday. This is just a 30-minute meeting to go over the school discipline bill. And also, and just so we all recognize, we have only noticed the school discipline bill for this meeting, although the environment has changed since our first discussion, and I of course recognize that, and I'm sure we all recognize that. And so anyway, the purpose of this is to, if we have further thought about this bill, and also questions that you still have. The bill has been delayed until April 8th at least. So we have more time if we want to ask questions and have them answers and understand more in depth what the impacts are. The other thing I'd like to ask is whether Rob, Kathleen, or Bill Sutter could let us know where this bill is and what feedback other districts are giving, so we understand what's happening on a sort of in a statewide. If anyone's prepared for that, I know that's an impromptu question.
The case legislative meeting is this Friday, so there'll definitely be information coming out of that.
Okay.
So since our last meeting, I have had some additional conversations. My sense from the school attorneys, which is the group I weigh in with most frequently, is that the largest area of concern is around the revisions to section 146 about the limitation of law enforcement.
Look in the 4 drawers below the printer.
So that's an area that I understand there's a lot of law enforcement input on and a fair amount of concern from school districts. It's my understanding that some of the rural and smaller districts may also have concerns with their ability to implement the other sections of the bill, but the main focus has been around the law enforcement engagement piece.
Any questions about what Kathleen just shared? Anyone? And Kathleen, yeah, Richard.
Which piece of that law enforcement engagement on the bill?
So what I have heard is just a general serious concern about limiting the ability of law enforcement to enforce those criminal laws. So when we look at the bill itself, it's at the very end. I think it starts on page 14, actually, right in the middle. And this is the area that this board had spent some time discussing at the last meeting, where we were talking about the particular criminal offenses that are listed there. What I have heard from other school districts is concerned with this whole section. They haven't necessarily taken the same more nuanced approach that we began with at the board's last meeting, where we were looking at a red line that might, for example, say we don't need law enforcement to engage around alcohol, but would we want the ability to engage law enforcement for something like trespass or harassment or interference with educational activities? So that's where most of the conversation has been, just with real concerns about that overall language.
Do you have a follow-up question, Richard, or are you good?
Well, no, I guess the question that I had pertained more to violent crimes. And the list that were listed does not suggest violent crimes. They really suggest things that the school can take care of.
Does anyone have any other questions about sort of what is and what isn't included in this? I know a community member sent an example that I actually asked Kathleen about because I was curious. So I personally think it's a valid question about when we can call law enforcement and what they do. I think that it gets into whether then an arrest is made and making sure that with our partner agencies that they can still come to support, because I don't necessarily think our teachers and staff will all be able to handle every one of these scenarios. But in my mind, it's that the arresting process is separate. Am I reading this correctly, Kathleen?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So the point of the bill isn't that we can't call law enforcement, it's how law enforcement responds. So they can intervene and they can help de-escalate a situation that our staff may not be able to do. But the idea is that there won't then be an arrest on the student's record. Is that one way of looking at this bill, or no?
I do think that that was an important conversation that this board had about whether the language would actually limit the ability of school districts to engage law enforcement. Would law enforcement respond if we were to say, we want you to come intervene and de-escalate this conduct, but you know that you can't ticket or arrest? As a practical matter, whether or not that would happen, I do think that the language of this bill would permit that, particularly with the suggested red line language that we developed after the board's last meeting. You'll recall that we had proposed some red line language that says that inserts a clause so that it would read, law enforcement shall not be prohibited from intervening to assist a school in resolving conduct that constitutes the listed offenses, but shall not arrest or ticket. So we had looked for clarifying language just to make clear that we can call. They're just limited in what they can do when they respond.
Okay.
But if whatever the behavior is continues on to when they are not on school district property, law enforcement does what has all their powers they usually have, correct?
Yes, this bill only limits the ability of law enforcement to ticket or arrest if this conduct is happening at school, at a school event, or on school grounds. If the kid was to engage in the same conduct just over the border from school grounds, then it would be criminal activity for which law enforcement could be engaged.
So when you talk about school activities, would that include things like sports events that are not on school property, or things like band and color guard that's not on any school's property, or prom, all the things that would not be on property but still would be a school event?
Yes, it would apply in those circumstances as it's currently written.
That's a great question to understand exactly when it applies, and also how you communicate that to students so that they understand that their behavior will be treated one way at school or at a school sanctioned event and in a different way when they're off school. My child is at Boulder High, and it's a very porous campus with the community. So it'll be an interesting challenge from a communications perspective, and it's an open campus, as is Fairview. So that makes for just a conversation about how students recognize that certain behaviors are permitted or are not going to be charged on their record on campus, but will be sort of 6 feet away from where they go for lunch. So that's one thing that I've been thinking about. I had another question that's really specific, and this is just to look into, and it relates to the shootings last Monday. My understanding is that there are some types of things on your record that would prevent you from buying firearms, and I don't know exactly what they are, but this is what is defined in and it also relates to the extreme risk legislation, the red flag law that was passed in 2020. And I am just curious if there are any anything that we are keeping off of a student's record that might have been used to prevent the purchase of a firearm. And that's just an open question. I don't know if you can answer it now or.
I don't know the gun laws well enough to answer that off the top of my head. I can say that the offense that we know is on the perpetrator's record from Arvada West is one that we would no longer be able to call law enforcement to intervene with under this proposed legislation.
Okay. I would like to know a little bit more about that and also understand if with both between the extreme risk and also the general rules around purchase of firearms when you have items on your record, I just want to make sure that even if we don't do an arrest, that there might be another mechanism to flag that so that that person would not be able to buy an assault rifle or whatever it is.
And I have a clarifying question about what was on this shooter's record at Arvada West. Are you talking about when he beat up the kid and was hitting him in the head?
Yes.
So
I'm talking about that because it did not result in a serious bodily injury. So he would not have been, that same conduct would not be able to be ticketed or arrested for under the proposed legislation.
Okay. That's a little bit concerning because I mean, maybe it wasn't as violent as it sounded in the paper, because sometimes in the paper you don't get the entire story, but it sounded pretty violent to me.
Okay. What other questions? So, and again, this is an evolving piece of legislation. So I'm just keeping the conversation with this board in particular because I know that we're interested in this because of our own work on school discipline. Kathy?
Well, at the last meeting, I had wondered how staff, like our principals, what their response was to it, and if they saw any unintended consequences or problems with it, if we had a chance to do that. It was spring break, so I'm thinking not.
Yeah, let's carry that question over to our meeting next Tuesday. We'll put this back on the legislative update for next Tuesday.
And then I know that Bill was looking at getting the fiscal notes, and it sounds like they haven't gotten that yet from any of the affected agencies like us or like law enforcement. I'm guessing that's still in process.
I think Laura sent it out. It's been posted. It's not particularly specific with school districts. It's more general terminology around increased workload for reporting, additional staff needed for reporting. And I think there was some more details for some of the other agencies, but I think Laura sent it out.
Yeah, she did. That was
Yeah,
sent
I'm
out.
just wondering if there's going to be any more detail, or is that as good as it will get?
That's probably as good as it gets, unless it's amended and with something that can be more specifically identified. We struggled a little bit to identify, the direct impacts to a school district and had to go with kind of that general terminology.
I wouldn't undersell the cost of communication and awareness. The district is asked to do communication, education, and awareness both to students and parents on a variety of issues that we all support. And I feel that to do it in a systemic way that effectively reaches our whole community, we're going to need to invest a lot more into that activity. And I do hope that if there's not a fiscal note on this to help us out, I'll be really disappointed because this is a lot for our district to do. It doesn't mean it isn't the right thing, but it certainly will mean reprioritizing other initiatives that we're doing. The other question I wanted was, is it clear that a district or a charter school cannot opt out of this? Cannot request a waiver is the better language.
I would say that there has been feedback that about that point where we don't believe it's really strongly worded. to be a non-waivable provision for charter schools. That was interim feedback that I did provide to our lobbyist and to CASB and to CASE so that we could make that clear. I think there need to be a few things, including another section of statute that would be amended by this bill to say that, to list this as non-waivable for charter schools. But the way it's written right now, it really requires school districts to adopt a policy that requires charter schools to comply. So it's pretty indirect.
Okay, because that, and the reason I bring this up is just, you know, we have a 3 charter high schools, but we're all working with the same law enforcement. So if you think about if we have high schools that do adopt this policy and that don't, it's going to be a pretty, like, I just think it's adding a level of complexity where students are ticketed for things on one campus, but not on a campus 1 mile away. So that's a situation that I foresee to be pretty complicated and confusing to everybody. And just to have the same police officer be like, oh wait, okay, no ticket here, yes ticket here. I think, and I already think it's a little strange with the whole on-campus, off-campus, and especially in the case of Boulder High, where it just doesn't, no one even knows where the campus ends there because it's so much a part of the community. And I'm not sure if we're going to have to stake a fence or something, because it's just, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. Any other thoughts or feedback? Kathleen, is this enough to work on? I think you have some questions, and then we'll probably learn more about what's going to happen with this legislation. Is that accurate? When is it being discussed again?
My latest information said it was scheduled for hearing in committee on April 7th.
Oh, 7th. I had the 8th.
Originally, that's what we were told, and then Ernestine clarified in a subsequent email to me that it's actually scheduled on the 7th.
Okay, well, that's good because that's the day after our next board meeting, I think, or work session.
Now
we're 2 weeks out. You're right, we're 2 weeks out.
Yeah, we don't have another board meeting till the 13th.
Okay.
So
well, do we feel like we have enough feedback for Ernestine? Is this enough?
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on the feedback we did give to Ernestine. Because the board wanted to have this additional conversation, we did not provide the original red line that I provided to the board before our previous meeting, where I had made a much more aggressive red line of this section on law enforcement authority. So what we did provide was more of an interim. The board saw that in my email on March 19th. And then on Monday, the 22nd, I provided to Ernestine the feedback that we clearly agreed upon, the ability to incorporate this into a UIP and not to have a separate plan, the language around making sure it's non-waivable for charter schools. And then the language that clarifies that law enforcement can intervene, they just can't ticket or arrest. But we did not provide any red line or any comments about the list of criminal conduct for which law enforcement cannot intervene. We had talked about a possible red line that would say, we understand for alcohol, we can't call law enforcement, or gambling, or loitering, and some of those lower level offenses. So we haven't provided that more detailed feedback if the board would like to do so on that section.
Board members, how do you feel about that? Kitty, you expressed a concern that there might be some assault type of activities that you would want law enforcement more involved.
Well, I mean, I would have to read through it again more carefully, but I would think if something is violent, and of course, violent is the question, law enforcement should be able to be involved. I mean, if it's, kind of a fight between kids that you know, when I was in school, everybody just said, okay, boys will be boys. You know, not that that's right, but versus something that could really be injuring somebody. But I don't know how to draw the line there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another problem. Because if you draw the line in statute and you later find out, oh, this incident, you know, doesn't, you know, shouldn't fall here, but it does. So I have a concern about that as well. But I think there should be something that would allow some kind of subjectivity around violence, that where some kinds would, you know, be something the school would deal with, and other kinds would be something the law enforcement would deal with.
Stacy?
This is something I'd really like to hear from principals and teachers about. I mean, you know, I feel a little odd making these changes when they're the ones on the front lines who are going to have to deal with this. And so I really, really want to hear from them, especially, I mean, I know Kathy already said this, but if we're going to make some detailed specifications, I think it has to come from them.
Right. Lisa?
I think my feedback is that I'm comfortable with the interim edits. I'm still not in support of the initial red line draft we discussed. I don't share the bulk of the concerns that were brought up here today, except that I would be interested in following up more on the financial questions.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I also
You know,
yeah, Richard.
I listened to the Adams County legislative delegation, and they were discussing this particular bill too. And I listened to Dominic Moreno, and he was just trying to make sure that people got the information straight and understand the information, and that law enforcement is not prevented from arresting kids if they're violent and they're doing really violent stuff. But what it does do is that it puts the burden back to the school administrators and the school district to be able to deal with those issues that are really outlined in that list of crimes, if you will. And I understand that, and I think that that's where it should be, that the school district should deal with those things before a kid getting arrested or taken to jail. So I think I'm pretty much in agreement with the way that list was composed and the list that's there currently.
Yeah, I have some concerns about the line of violence, so I'm not sure the line is in the right place. And I don't know how to, because we're put, to Kitty's point, because this is in statute, it's not going to give us a lot of flexibility. So I do think we need to make sure that principals and teachers feel that the funding we get will appropriately enable them to take on these new responsibilities, which have not been part of their responsibilities before. And I think we also need to be really clear who is responsible at our campuses for doing this work, because it's different work than has been done. And I want to understand how that's going to, how the training works, and if everyone is feeling comfortable with that. Kitty?
Yeah, and another thing about the violence piece, if it is not strictly codified, then we have to be sure that violence committed by, you know, quote unquote violence committed by a white student would be looked at the exact same way as it is committed by a student of color, because that's the problem that we've had all along, right? That the disproportionality of how we respond to things. So that is a concern for me, that you know, that it would be treated equitably. And then another thing that just occurred to me now is something that could be considered a hate crime, or violence targeted towards somebody because of their race or gender or whatever. And is that more serious, and should it be codified differently? I don't know. But I know we need to be sure we don't have those things happening in our schools. Right now, the issue, of course, is with Asians. That's what everybody's talking about now. But it will be Latinos, it will be Black people, it will be LGBTQ people, it'll be Muslims, it'll be Jews, it'll be any whoever it is. I think we need to be careful about that.
Okay. Other questions? We'll bring it back up at another board meeting as we find out what other districts are doing. I guess I'm personally okay with the sort of the less red line feedback, but I'm really concerned about that line of violence and who's really going to be able to intervene effectively. So I'm wondering if there's a way just to build in some more flexibility based on what we learn. I'm hearing that a little bit, as well as if you can get a waiver for this, I personally oppose it entirely because I think it's just creating a mess. Oh, Kitty?
Yeah, another thing that just came up for me is that you could have one level of, if we want to call it violence, committed by somebody who is small and not very strong versus the exact same behavior from somebody who, is bigger, very strong, works out, are going to have different effect on the victim. So that's another piece of it that I think adds some uncertainty.
Any final thoughts? We have another meeting in 1 minute that we're going to need to sign out of this and log into the other. Kathy?
I just have a question on timing. You said we'll do it at another board meeting, but that'll be too late. So are we not going to talk between now and the hearing?
We can set up another meeting.
Okay.
And just
and maybe
see how
we
it goes.
can cancel it if there's nothing to talk about, but
Exactly.
I think it would make sense to get something on the books.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm not going to be present at the next meeting, Tina, just so that you know.
Okay, on the April 14th meeting.
No, on the one that's coming up, the Hickenlooper thing.
Oh, got it. Okay, got it. Perfect. Okay, I was thinking a little further ahead. All right, so thanks everyone for your time, and we're going to try our other meeting. I believe it's a different link, right, Laura?
That's correct. You'll log off and log into the Zoom link.
Thank you.
Huh?